the comments. Wait for some of you to say hi. This room is really hot. I've had quite a day. Been outside a lot, so. Say hi if you're here. All right, great. All right, so one person's here at least. Maybe give it a couple more minutes before I do my normal announcements. I'm good. How are you? Happy Monday. Hey, okay. Perfect. All right. So, today's Monday Fun Day. And what that means is that we go live here for like an hour and a half and we talk about cool shit. Thank you. This is actually my room. This isn't going to be the room I end up filming in, but the room that I used to be filming in, the like one that I've been filming in the past few times, like all the stuff's moved out of there. So this is what we're working with today. Hello. All right, great. So today's Monday Fun Day. So we go live for an hour and a half here, and then we go live on my OnlyFans for as long as we need to finish, if you know what I mean. This is actually my bedroom. So yeah, if that's your thing, check out jasminejafar.me, or my OF is Jasmine JAZMEN00. I go live after. It's a very, very, very different kind of live. But I know a lot of you guys like both, and some of you guys like this, some of you guys like that. You know me, I just have something for everybody. And today's topic, I did this a while ago. Going through 10 common logical fallacies. I don't remember which 10 I talked about, or maybe I went through 20. I don't know. But I thought it was nice to do a refresher because that was a really long time ago. Like I didn't even have the moderator I have now back then. And I actually remember we used examples from Andrew Tate. So that was actually like that was funny because a lot of people were upset about that. We will not be doing that today. Instead, we will be using examples from my Insta comments. So logical fallacies. Is it true that identity politics is completely based on ad hominem and related fallacies? Is it true that identity politics? Well, not necessarily. So I would say it's a non sequitur actually to say that identity politics identity politics involves an ad hominem. I don't think so, because an ad hominem is a specific thing. So just saying identity politics is a blanket statement always involves that. I wouldn't say is true. You said that name and my brain instantly hurt. Which name? Logical fallacies? Andrew Tate does not care about logically proving anything. I agree. But it was fun because I didn't actually mean to use him for all of them. I was just trying to use, I remember I had I don't remember how many fallacies I was doing, and I was looking for examples. And I remember I saw a clip of him and I'm like, oh, that's an example for one. It was like a 2-minute clip. And it ended up being that like 7 out of 10 of the fallacies I want to talk about was already in the 2-minute clip. And I was like, okay, well, at this point, I don't want to just use Andrew Tate for 7 examples and not 3 other examples. So then I just used him for all of them. But I thought it would be a good refresher. Quick disclaimer on logical fallacies is a logical fallacy is basically an argument that isn't logically coherent. Now, this doesn't mean that it's not effective sometimes in making your point. So a lot of people use them. I've probably used them. You've probably used them, but that doesn't make them valid points. So I think it's really good. It's a good way to build critical thinking skills, to be able to point out logical fallacies, not only in others, but in yourself. So this isn't me saying, ooh, I never make these mistakes, or that these aren't going to help you at all. I mean, our presidential debates are usually filled with a lot of these fallacies, but this is just an exercise for all of us to actually know how to make a logically coherent argument and to have an argument that actually has a basis. And so we're going to point out some of the common ways that people make arguments that don't actually address the claim, or that are on shaky grounds, or when the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise, all of that. Everything you just said made my brain hurt. I'm sorry, guys. Last week, I thought this was going to be a lighter topic because last week we spoke on free will, and that was kind of like dense. So this week I thought we would slow it down a little bit, but I guess, it is hard to always catch these. So like I'll explain them, we'll go through examples, and then I would urge everybody, like when you're just out and about or when you're listening to a video, to try to see if you can point these out. I think learning that or learning how to do that is a really great skill, and it also helps you debate because when you can point these out and the audience is like, oh yeah, that's a good point, and then you're like, wait a minute, that's not a good point because, and if the audience isn't dumb, like on Andrew Tate's audience, then you're going to be able to point out these inconsistencies. I'm not good at debating. Well, no one has to be good at everything. All right, so let's get started. I don't know where my regulars are though. They need to come back. All right. So number one, this is a very common one, is the straw man fallacy. Okay, class, who knows what a straw man fallacy is? How many fallacies did Trump do on his last presidential debate? I don't even remember like what Trump said in his last presidential debate, but I assure you he probably, it's not just Trump though. I don't want to single out Trump. I think this is what I'll say. Trump's audience seems to care less about logical fallacies or Trump's supporters seem to care less about logical fallacies than I would say other politician supporters do. King of the Hunt, are you here today? He's not here yet, it seems. He usually will say something in the chat when he's here. It's a different arena of thought compared to last week because it's dissecting thinking compared to applying a philosophical idea. Yeah, I think it's a little easier. What are fallacies? I actually want to give you like an exact definition. So a mistaken belief based on an unsound argument. Yeah, so that's the word I was looking for, sound and unsound. When an argument is sound, a logical fallacy basically indicates that an argument is unsound. Strawman is propping up a bad argument to appear like it has substance, but instead it's empty or unrelated, right? Not necessarily. So a straw man is actually, I wanted to give you guys actually definitions. So it sets up a false version of the opponent's argument that works at defeating the false version. So it basically is you misstating your opponent's position and then fighting against what you misstated because it's easier than to actually fight against their actual position. So example, I say people should be free to watch porn if they choose. And then someone says, so you think children should have just unlimited access to porn? And then they fight against children having unlimited access to porn. That's a straw man because that wasn't what I said. That wasn't my argument. My argument is people should have free access to porn. And then they go, oh, so you're saying children, right? This is a very, very common one, is when someone says something, you intentionally usually misinterpret what they're saying to make it worse than what they're actually saying. And then you attack that argument and not what they were actually arguing. Does that make sense? So very, very common. The opposite of this is called a steel man. And the reason they call it a straw man is because straw is so weak. So you're able to like blow it versus steel is like hard. So steel man is giving the most charitable interpretation of what the argument that your opponent is making and then fighting against that. So that's just how you debate good. So a tip I heard once that I love is you should be able to restate your opponent's argument in a way that they agree with. In a way that honestly, sometimes in a way that they could do better than themselves. Like they would be like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So a way when you want to actually engage in actual good discourse is someone says, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, okay, can I restate your argument so you can tell me if I'm understanding it correctly? And they'll be like, okay. And then actually restate their argument in a way that they would agree with, right? So that's a steel man. And then attack that argument. That is an intellectually honest way, a good faith way to have a debate or discussion, because you're actually arguing against the point they actually made, which is with a straw man. You'll take what they said, twist it and manipulate it to make their argument sound bad, and then be like, see, that's a stupid argument, when it isn't actually their argument. Ooh, I love people bringing in premises. my psych and logic people. Well, premise 1, people should have free access to porn. 2, premise, children are people. 3, children should have free access to porn. I guess if you do it that way, sure. But I still think that's a straw man because, usually I'd say in normal life, if someone's like, people should have the right to drink alcohol, if they're like, we should ban alcohol. So you think children should? Usually that's not what people are saying. And I think if you said that in like a debate setting, that would still be a straw man if you're going to go that route. Cause I actually thought of that when I was writing this, but I was like, no, I still think it's a straw man. So I'm glad you caught that because I actually caught that when I was writing it down, but it's also not, I still think that isn't usually what people mean. So if you want to be technical, then sure. But we can even use another example. Like I could say women should have the right to post their bodies online if they choose. And then someone says, so pimps should have the right to have forced women into, just changing the argument. So I'm doing one where it's totally changing it, but I would say even that is a straw man, which you just did. Is premise 2 false? Premise 2 isn't technically false, but I'd say that asking someone to specifically qualify everything like that, I think that's a straw man when someone says, oh, I think weed should be legal. And someone says, oh, so you think kids should have it? You think kids should have weed? No, I don't think, you know what I mean? In today's world, it's more important to be empathetic and learn how to think rather than just what we should think. Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you. Oh, I'm glad you guys are saying hi to each other. It's used in political discussions a fucking ton. I'm trying to think. I don't know if he's in here, but there was one of the same guy I mentioned last week about the porn discussion. We were having a discussion today on children and children and what was it? Being bullied in school or something. And I said, oh, so I said something along the lines of, so if a kid is like a minority group, this is what I said. I was like, if a kid is in like an ethnic minority and he's getting bullied, would you tell the parents that they should make the kid adhere more to white dominant culture? And, that is, a lot of times in the West, what you're basically saying is we all have to adhere to white dominant culture. And he's like, well, that's basically like saying, and he didn't really do this exactly, but it would be like if someone was like, well, you're saying that only white kids can be racist and bully people. No, that's not what I said. So you know what I mean? They're changing the argument to give it like a worse interpretation than it actually is. Now, I think he actually misinterpreted me, but a lot of times people don't actually misinterpret you. They just try to strawman you. And I'm not saying I've never done this. Strawman is, I think laws are important for structured society. No, laws against abortion are not important for structured society. Kind of, but I think that's so just unrelated that I think that would have that isn't like a very there's so many common examples of strawmans. That's what makes it a strawman. I mean, I don't think you're wrong. And I love your name, by the way, Atheist Man 4. I am also an atheist. But for instance, to say, okay, here's an example. Candace Owens saying, us saying Kanye West is anti-Semitic because of his tweet. And Candace is like, you guys are wrong because you're saying Kanye West said he wants to kill all the Jews in his tweet. And so you're wrong. Well, no, that's not what we're saying. We're saying he's anti-Semitic. And anti-Semitic doesn't mean the only way to be anti-Semitic isn't that you want to exterminate all the Jews. You can be anti-Semitic without wanting to exterminate all the Jews. So that's an example of a straw man. Her trying to defend Kanye West and be like, you guys are ridiculous because he didn't, call for the genocide of Jews. So therefore you guys are she said this. She said, you guys are being dishonest by calling him anti-Semitic because he didn't call for the extermination of Jews. And she's insinuating that we're saying that he was calling for the extermination of Jews by his tweet. And that's not what we're saying. So she strawmanned it by saying that that's what we meant by anti-Semitic when she knows that's not what we meant by anti-Semitic. We didn't think that he's calling for that. So is that okay? Good. What did Kanye West say? The tweet about he's going to go, I don't even remember. What was the tweet again? Something on Jewish people. You guys remember? I don't even remember. Death Con, whatever on Jewish people. Clea disowns. Yes. Can you define the steelman again with an example? So a steelman is giving your opponent the best possible interpretation of their argument so that's what the opposite is. So if an example would be like, so this is an example of a straw man. So I'm pro-life or I'm pro-choice. And then someone goes, okay, so you think that you should be able to kill babies. Well, that's a straw man because oftentimes people that are pro-choice don't think that it's a baby. So you may think it's a baby, but they're not advocating for the killing of babies. That's straw manning. Steel manning would be like, okay, let me get this straight. You think that a woman's right to her bodily autonomy is very important, and you don't think that the fetus is a fully formed human being, and therefore you don't think it's the murder of babies, and that's why you're pro-choice. And then she could go yes, or he could go yes, and then you say, okay, well, here's why I think it is a baby. That is how you have an actual debate. You don't just say, well, you're trying to kill babies. That's a straw man. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't have Twitter or what's Mastodon, but I've seen people claim that Ron DeSantis and other conservatives are trying to genocide trans people. Is that a straw man of the Republican position? Yes, I would say that's a straw man of the Republican position, for sure. So straw mans happen on both sides. So I vehemently disagree with Ron DeSantis and conservatives, but I do think it's like a straw man when people say like they want to just exterminate and come out and shoot trans people. That I don't think that's what they do. Now, to say that they want to take away rights from trans people, I don't think that's a straw man. It's also important to know a person's beliefs when they are making arguments. Most of the times, even if you win the argument, their beliefs may still not change. Yeah, I agree. The issue is that most people have debates don't go in with the intention that their view will change. It's debating solely for the sake of debating. Yeah, and it depends when you're having like a one-on-one conversation with somebody versus in front of other people. Me and that one guy who isn't here now, we were having this exact discussion. If you're trying to persuade the person in front of you, you might use a different tactic than if you're on like one of these stupid, burn type, like, you have a different intention. An actual true debate where you're trying to change minds, that's important. So a steelman is exact opposite to the strawman approach, or is it just different ethically in the realm of debates? It's an opposite in the sense that with a strawman, you're trying to almost give the worst possible interpretation, and with the steelman, you're giving them the most charitable. So it's kind of like least charitable, most charitable. I wouldn't say they're opposites, but in that sense is what I mean. They're opposites. So you give me an argument, and if I was trying to strawman it, I would try to twist it into something that it's not and argue against that. If I was trying to steelman you, I would give you the best possible interpretation of what you mean, like give it a very charitable take and argue against the charitable take, which is usually harder. It's just why people don't want to do it, versus being like, oh, so you think this, when you kind of know that's not what they're saying. Debates and typically for the purpose of changing your own mind or changing the mind of the person you're dealing with, to convince a third party of the strength of your position. Yes, that's why I said it's different when you, because no, sometimes it is just me and this person, like, oh, what do you think of this? Ooh, let's debate. Like, I've done this with ex-boyfriends like all the time, and there's no one else there. But if you're doing it in a like formal setting, then yes, it is to sway a third party. Hey, okay, let's move on. All right. All right, so this one, the circular fallacy, this is also called begging the question. So this occurs when someone restates or reaffirms the premise as the conclusion. So the problem with this is that it never progresses the argument past the premise or the premises. So example, sex work is bad because it's obvious it's bad. Common one is with circular reasoning is the Bible or religious. The Bible is true because it's true. So you start with the premise, and then the evidence you use to support the premise is just the same conclusion. I mean, you start with the conclusion, and then the evidence you use to support the conclusion is the same conclusion. Sex work is bad because it's bad. Well, why? Because it's just bad. So that's just circular. It's bad because it's bad. It's true because it's true. So people use this a lot with, I mean, you kind of have to use it with religion. Atheist man 4 probably agrees. Theoretically, debates to convince the ideal agnostic of what the truth is. But you're talking about formal debates. And I think formal debates are like far and few in between. I think if you're talking about formal debates, it's like there's a premise. I mean, there's what is it called? The motion. And then there's people for the motion and against the motion. And you have 2 minutes to, like, yes, I agree with you. But most of the time, a lot of people are engaging in informal debate. Do you have Arabic origins? No, I am Persian. I find sex work is bad because it's immoral, and being immoral is bad. Well, then you have to, I would say, why is being immoral bad? Do you have, I already read that one. The Bible is true because the Bible says so, yes. A lot of people do the straw man or circular argument, especially when talking to people online. It's the original troll tactic and a complete waste of time to argue with people that do that. So the sex work is immoral. So being immoral is bad. Sex work is immoral. Therefore, being immoral is bad. That makes sense. But then the problem there is your premise. So your conclusion follows from your premise if your premise is true. But I would say in that circumstance, your premise is on shaky grounds. Now you have to tell me your premise isn't true. Sex work is immoral. Okay, now you have to tell me why sex work is immoral. You have to convince me of that point. How many logical fallacies did Matt Walsh commit in the What is a Woman documentary that Elon promoted on Twitter? I never fully watched it, but I'm sure a ton. Okay. Okay, cool. So does everyone get that one? Should we move on? All right, this one a lot of people know, an ad hominem. So an ad hominem fallacy is when they're attacking the person and not their argument. So one example is saying that the identity or some quality of a person disqualifies them from making any valid points, often used in political debates. Make sure that you're not attacking the person, you're actually contending with the content of their argument. So this is very, like, a person can be a bad person and in a number of ways and still be logically correct in any given instance. So this is what I always say about separating the claim from the person. So I may say, sex work isn't immoral. And someone goes, well, you're a sex worker. So your point, like, my argument to that is, yeah, you're going to say that because you're a sex worker. That doesn't have anything to do with my claim. If sex work is immoral, it's immoral irrespective of whether or not I'm a sex worker. If sex work isn't immoral, then it's also not immoral irrespective of whether or not I'm a sex worker. So an ad hominem a lot of times will be attacking the person's intentions for saying it. It tries to cut at the argument by saying, you're only making this argument because. And knowing how to think critically is knowing how to take the claim and separate it from the person. Now, this is hard. And this is one that kind of, I would argue almost everybody has done this. And that's why this is commonly used in political debates, because it's one that actually does seem to have an effect on people. But it doesn't actually, it's not a logically sound argument to say, well, I support the police, or not I support, because then it's about you. The police are good. Well, yeah, because you're a police officer. Police are good is the claim. We either have evidence that supports the claim or we have evidence that doesn't support the claim. What one person's relation, the person who said it, what their relationship is to being a police officer or their personal biases may speak to why he made the claim, but they don't speak to whether or not the claim is correct or incorrect. You never get anywhere arguing with people that do that. It's annoying when people put words in your mouth. Yeah, but a lot of people do it. Have you ever considered becoming a teacher? No, I don't think I'm actually good at it. But thank you for saying that I am. Hey, that's Trump's favorite argument. What's Trump's favorite argument? Trump has used pretty much all of these. In fact, like, if you go on YouTube and you just search logical fallacies, a lot of them will use Trump as an example because he has a lot of them. But again, like, that's why even I wanted to get the exact definition, and the place I was looking at it for wrote, like, this is commonly used in presidential debates. And it is, right? Like, we need tax cuts for everybody. Well, yeah, you're saying that because you're rich. And that means you want tax cuts for the rich. Well, we should have tax cuts for everybody is an independent statement. So whether or not we should doesn't have anything to do with the person saying it. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Next one is a post hoc argument. So it's kind of also called after this, therefore because of this. So this occurs when someone assumes that because of an order of events that the first event caused the second event. So claiming that B always happens after A, then A must cause B. So this is a little bit different than correlation versus causation. So correlation versus causation is like, just because A and B are happening at the same time, and maybe you can even say they're correlated, doesn't mean B caused A or A caused B. This is similar in the sense of, because A came before B, that doesn't mean A caused B. So an example I use with this is one I see all the time in the red pill world. Well, women started working and started gaining economic independence, and recent studies show that women are less happy. So they're less happy because they started working and because they're not in the nuclear family unit anymore. That is a huge fallacy, because just because women entered the workforce, and now we're seeing that women are reporting being less happy, so are men. And we talked about some of the reasons that could be. We read Lost Connections. They're like, oh, well, this is why. That's a fallacy. A didn't cause B just because it came before B. I think the bias is most relatable because it makes sense. Most people are going to defend what they do for a living or their hobbies or beliefs. But it doesn't make sense if you're actually thinking about the claim and the argument. It only makes sense if you're also thinking about the person. So it doesn't actually, if I say this phone is 2 feet tall, no matter who says it, the phone is either 2 feet tall or it's not 2 feet tall. It doesn't matter who says it. It's either true or it's not true. That's the point. So any claim that you have, it doesn't matter who's making it. What matters is if the claim is true and it's backed by evidence, if the argument is sound or if the argument is not sound. For an argument to be sound, there has to be two true premises, or not true. There has to be a true premise or multiple true premises, and then there has to be a conclusion that logically follows from the premise. Does not matter who is making the argument at all. If Hitler says, well, all cats are blue or all cats are black, like let's say this was true, George is a cat, George is black, that is still a logically sound argument. Or if he were to say, all humans experience the force of gravity, Jasmine is a human, Jasmine experiences the force of gravity. I don't care that you can't say, well, you're a fucking murderous maniac. It's true he's a murderous maniac, but that doesn't make what he just said not true. Does that make sense? So I understand why people fall for it, but that's because people are not thinking about the argument. They're thinking about whether or not they like the person, whether or not the person has any credibility, etc. And I actually want to make one of my future streams like very soon. I have to do an evidence CLE. So I'm going to take that opportunity to talk a little bit about how evidence works, like in a courtroom. And you're going to see a lot of parallels to this. Like the court tries to avoid sometimes some of this stuff because of the fact that people are going to fall into these biases. And so they try to make things inadmissible or admissible, kind of trying to make it fair as possible. And we're going to talk about different kinds of evidence, self-authenticating evidence, kind of the like why certain types of evidence are more powerful than other kinds of evidence. And same with, we could do a whole episode on this, on evidence and arguments, right? So we could do like outside of that, like anecdotal evidence is not as strong as empirical data or a study. One study is not as strong as a fact that's been replicated through numerous studies that's been peer reviewed, right? So we have different levels of like having evidence for a claim. Some people it depends how much you know the person, obviously. If you know someone's being biased, of course you'll call them out on it. Yes, but the bias doesn't have I don't think you guys are getting. So the bias doesn't have anything to do with the argument. An argument is sound or it's not sound. It either has evidence that backs the claim or it doesn't have evidence that backs the claim. It doesn't matter who makes it. The person could be the most biased person ever, right? Like I could be the person who my whole livelihood could be dependent on I grow vegetables and that is how I make money. But if I said vegetables are healthy for you, you could be like, well, you're biased because you sell vegetables. But if I never sold another vegetable again, there's evidence to support the fact that broccoli is good for you health-wise. Do you see what I'm saying? The bias speaks maybe to the person's intention, but it doesn't speak to whether or not the claim is valid or not. Some people who interviewed Jordan Peterson used that guys, I cannot talk today. Mentioned about his statements of women's happiness within the workplace and the connection to them performing or attempting to perform the same as men. So are you saying they called him out on it? I haven't watched Jordan Peterson in a while, but Jordan Peterson is one who definitely does this. In fact, in the academic world, so Jordan Peterson likes to say a lot that, oh, the academic world, I lost credibility because of my views and because of wokeness and because of cancel culture. I'm not saying there's no basis to that. I'm not saying that there aren't people in academia that dislike or don't allow for views like his and think that's enough of a reason to be canceled. But what he doesn't mention to you is a lot of the reason he lost credibility is because academics do not behave like this. Academics don't jump to conclusions the way he's jumping to conclusions. This is something else I've noticed a lot with the red pill world. They make they'll make a conclusion based off evolutionary biology when no evolutionary biologist, you could look at any of the top evolutionary biologists, none of them make this claim. So the people that actually study this, the people that know the most about this, scientists, if you guys listen to scientists are very hesitant to make claims unless they are super, 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 super backed by things. Like if you listen to scientists talk, they're very much like, well, we know this, so we speculate that X, or we have some evidence that indicates X. Therefore, we think this may be caused by blah, 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 but we're not sure. Like even the other day, I was listening to even Richard Dawkins talk about, oh, how come there's homosexuality? Wouldn't that be weeded out through Darwinian natural selection? And he could have just said, because there's a bunch of theories as to why, but he just said, I don't know. Here are some theories that people have. I think maybe this one, I like this one better than these, but they don't make these kind of conclusions. Yeah, you'll go on red pill and they're like, oh, men are hardwired to want to spread their seed. Therefore, men are only happy if they have multiple women. And it's there's a reason no evolutionary biologist has said that, because there's actually not enough evidence for that claim. And whatever kind of evidence they have, you jump to a conclusion that doesn't follow. So this is an issue with Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson will say things like, oh yeah, that's a big one he does. Well, women are reporting being less happy. And so this is because we've gotten away from traditional values, because we've moved away from traditional values. And as we've done that, women have become less happy. We don't know. Women could have become less happy because some chemical has been in the last whatever many years put out in the air and it's making all of us less happy. Women could be less happy because there's some shit in our water. Women could be less happy because of social media. All of us are potentially less happy because of that. So there's so many different reasons why women could be less happy today, and to just assume it's this because it came at the same time or before this is a fallacy, and it's one that people don't jump to. He could even say oh, this could be the reason, but the problem with Peterson is he doesn't do that. He just says things like that. He was ostracized because his methods and work was objectively not sound and not good science. Wokeness is just the excuse he uses to help himself cope. Okay, that's what my moderator says. I agree. I have a lot of, I'm in the academic world. Now, I don't have any connection to, I think he was in Toronto. I have no connection to any of the professors or anybody there. But the consensus on Jordan Peterson among scientists, psychologists, professors, whatever, is not oh, we can't handle the wokeness. It's that his work isn't scientific, at least recently, right? Like at least since he's been on, he has turned into this ideologue that does a lot of like this top down reasoning, and it's not logically sound, it's not scientifically sound. Like he'll take something and be like, oh, women prefer this, and then he'll jump to like, oh, okay, he'll jump to some conclusion that doesn't follow. So he does a lot of I'm glad you mentioned evolutionary. Oh, let me see, I missed some stuff. I could imagine that a lot of researchers get frustrated of stumping out all the argument fallacies thrown at them. Well, researchers aren't the ones that are dealing with it. It's mostly people like us, because researchers aren't like sitting on like, you know, Reddit threads and or they're not watching like, Fresh and Fit on YouTube. Researchers, I can tell you this, just being like, they're kind of in a bubble. So are professors, so are students, where we're like talking and engaging with people that understand fallacies, that understand, like scientists are dealing with a lot of other scientists, and maybe they may disagree, but they have a foundation of, oh, here's why I disagree. Now, when it comes to relaying that information to the public, which a lot of times is not what their job is, like scientists figure out things and they use a scientific method, then their work gets peer reviewed by other scientists to check for biases and all that, and they're not dealing with those the way like you and I are. Tucker Carlson, yeah, that's the point. If you know them well enough, you can call out their bias based on evidence of what you know about them. No, guys. Oh, okay. You can call out their bias, but that doesn't attack the argument. If the argument is false, it doesn't matter if they're biased or not biased. And a claim, especially if it's a fact, is either a fact that's true or it's not true. There's no other options for if you're talking about something like that. Or it could be like partially true. You could say that. But there's an answer. There's an answer. If I say the vaccine will make you die. Okay, let me do the opposite. If I say the vaccine is effective and I am Pfizer, people who say, well, you're Pfizer, you have a bias, I understand why you're doing that, but the vaccine is either effective or it's not effective. It doesn't matter what Pfizer says. The vaccine has an efficacy level, and irrespective of who makes the claim is either true or it's not true. You may say, well, I don't then trust your evidence because you did the whatever. But Pfizer can say anything they want, and the vaccine has an efficacy level. It is a separate thing from them in that sense. So the claim about the vaccine, how effective it is, it doesn't matter what Pfizer says. Yes, they could be lying, but whether they're lying or not, it doesn't matter when it comes to what's actually true. Does this make sense? I don't want to be like confusing you guys more, but I'm seeing a lot of pushback to this. And this is a big one. These ad hominems are a big one because people are like, ooh, I'm not going to trust this person because this person had a reason for saying this. If I'm the biggest asshole in the world and I say the earth is round, it doesn't now mean the earth is flat. If I say the sky is blue and you hate me, the sky is still going to be blue. And if you love me and you think I walk on water and I tell you the sky is green, the sky is still blue. So you have to be able to separate claims from individuals. Now, I understand if it's somebody that you respect, you may be less skeptical automatically of the claim. Like if somebody that I know and I trust their reputation, I think they are somebody that usually is logically consistent and they say something, I may be more inclined to be like, ooh, I believe them over Donald Trump. But at the same time, if I want to actually believe something, if I want to actually take something as true, I have to do my independent research, or I have to be able to make that argument and not be like, well, I'm saying this because Jordan Peterson said it and I like Jordan Peterson, or I don't believe this because Jordan Peterson says it and anything Jordan Peterson says is false. That's not how you That's not sound. Does this make sense? If anyone disagrees with me, keep telling me. I don't know if I'm doing a great job explaining this. Like I said, I don't think I'm a great teacher, but for me, this is a big one. And that people are like, well, yeah, if somebody is biased, then their argument's incorrect. No, no, no. Bias doesn't invalidate an argument. Bias may influence why somebody believes an argument, but whether or not the argument is valid or not is going to be on the basis of independent evidence from that person. Now, if they say something like, well, I believe X, and there's no way it's not a provable, testable claim, then you're kind of stuck with like, and I don't like to believe those things anyway. I don't like to believe things that aren't testable. That's why I don't believe in God. Right. But and there's no reason to believe in God. There's no compelling evidence or compelling reason, in my opinion. So what I mean is when someone says, let's see, when someone says it is cost ineffective to buy car insurance from Geico, there's an answer to that. There's an answer to that because you can compare that to other insurance companies, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't make it true or untrue whether or not the person works at Geico. The claim, if you see it up on the board, Geico is the most cost-effective car insurance, you can go research that. It doesn't matter who said it. Okay. Academics have a rigid frame in which they research and publication work. If you ignore that, then yeah, it throws your credibility in question. What do you mean if you ignore that? Regardless if the claim is valid or not, you shouldn't claim someone is biased unless you have evidence to back it up. You can claim somebody is biased, but you can't claim that they're wrong because they're biased. Does that make sense? You can tell someone you're biased because of X, and you could be right, but you can't say they're wrong because of X unless you have an independent basis for saying they're wrong. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned evolutionary bio on the Red Pill Club because I've noticed a huge influx of their ideas depending on evolutionary bio. It's pushed me to maybe study it for my master's just to see myself if there's validity. Who knows? I will save you the time, but again, don't trust me. A lot of it's not. A lot of it's not. A lot of it is shaky, the premise, or just flat out wrong. And then even when it has like a little bit of truth, they just take it and they jump to something that does not follow. Why should I trust the woke scientists who spent their whole life studying fake science and are paid by big pharma get destroyed? Yeah, this sounds like a YouTube title for like the whole right wing right now. Whether or not big pharma has an incentive. Now, you may say this evidence is shaky because I don't trust the study because the methodology was faulty. The sample size wasn't representative of the general sample size. You can do stuff like that, but that's going to be true or not true or respect. You can't say, I don't trust the methodology is faulty because they did it. No, but that's not sound. That's unsound. JP has made immense efforts to discredit himself in the eyes of woke leftists so they would target him and then he could play victim. Whenever he gets backed into a corner, he legit starts crying and appealing to emotions. It's so cringe. It's funny because I know the red pill people idolize him, but the red pill people are so big proponents of maintaining frame and never showing vulnerability as a man. And I'm like, your king cries more than anyone I've seen like on TV or in the public sphere. Hey, quick question. Do you think Jesus liked titties? Yes. This is why doing your own research and looking for reputable sources, you can question someone's credibility, but if you check in what they say rings true, then you can't argue it's wrong because of them or the bias. Thank you. Exactly. Yes, you're making sense. You're outlining. Okay, thank you. Agreed. Everyone has a bias based on their own life experiences and beliefs. The job of listening to a claim/argument to see work with the objective factual claims and may encounter any subjective argument with a more objective. So like me and Heather, since reading this book, we're actually reading a book and it talks about this, that Like, the whole point of peer review is because if different people who have different biases check your work, then that's supposed to eliminate some of that, right? Like, they put in science puts in as many safeguards as possible to try to eliminate, try to get down. Now, you can make the argument you can never eliminate bias altogether. Sure, fine. But there are things you can do to minimize it. And what science does and tries to do is to be as objective as possible. So whether or not the science bears something out, that's just, it either does or it doesn't, or it kind of does, but more research needs to be done. I mean, there's like a multitude of things, but none of those things are, well, the person that told me is a fucking loser, so I don't believe it. Okay. I mean, the thing about logical fallacies is that they seem quite confined to purely deductive logic. For example, I do not watch Jordan Peterson, but if Jordan Peterson was here and you said that he is making a fallacy by assuming before and after causation, I doubt he would agree. He would probably give some sort of theory of human nature, and the studies regarding unhappiness would be some part of some sort of cumulative case of evidence in favor of his explanations. That's true. No, he can't do that, though. He really, like, what? I guess unless he pointed to a study. So he would have to do this. Women entered the workforce. Studies prove that entering the workforce made women less. So that has to be, that's what's missing. Therefore, you can argue that women are at least partially less happy because they entered the workforce. You can't say human nature. Like, I mean, that would be that would also be, I would say that's a non sequitur. Like, it depends exactly what he said, but you have to prove that middle premise. You have to prove that, okay, women gained economic freedom. Something has to prove that having economic freedom makes people less happy. Therefore, that's what you need to do. So just jump from women entered the workforce, women are now less happy. You can't prove that causation there. So I agree with you. I think that's what Jordan Peterson would do, but I don't think that would be valid. Now, if Jordan Peterson said, I, speculate because of this, again, as the problem is, a lot of these people don't put that caveat in. They just say, oh, well, women enter the workforce, that's why we're seeing so many of them unhappy. And now women are just so unhappy. And feminism told them that going into the workforce would be good. And now it doesn't follow. Back to the comment about academics, I stated that poorly. I was trying to convey that in academics, there's a set of expectations regarding how you go about research and publication. If Jordan Peterson's not here to those expectations, and it calls his work and by extension himself into question. Yes, it's not what he's saying. It's the fact that he's saying things that are not that aren't adhering to science or the scientific method, that he is using like just these common fallacies that the general public may like, and I don't know how much of it he does on purpose. Part of me thinks he does some of it on purpose, and then he's kind of gone off the deep end. Like, he's clearly losing it a little bit. You can see that in some of the stuff he's tweeting. The semen factory thing was super weird. And for somebody who's that educated to see something that absurd and not think to check the source is crazy. Also, in regards to attacking the credibility of the source purely deductively, you're right. Just because Pfizer says the vaccine is safe doesn't mean Pfizer is wrong. However, if we're doing our own research on the internet or at the library or whatever, it usually seems useful to at least acknowledge the biases of the sources, right? The sources of the evidence, not the person making the claim. So if you want to say, hey, like every study, if you know how to read a study, every study has a section where it goes conclusions and limitations. A lot of studies, especially if they're put in journals and stuff, they have a whole part where they say, oh, we should also measure this, or we should also do this with a bigger sample size. For instance, there is a study that wearing it only had changes 35. So one of the caveats is what we found here may not apply to women over 35, and there needs to be additional research as to that. So you can point out limitations and to look at the limitations of a study. And one of the limitations of the study could be, ooh, this was funded by so-and-so. If you look at all the methodology though, and it pans out, you could be like, ooh, I want to see this replicated by, I want to have that caveat in there before I fully subscribe to this. But you can't say that it's now biased because Pfizer told you to, and Pfizer's biased. You have to look at the sources, if that makes sense. And you have to know what a valid source and an invalid source is. So if you're saying, oh, I don't trust this super right-wing organization who put this study up on their page, that's because that's not a real study. That's not a credible source. It's not because they're biased. So for instance, if on a Red Pill podcast, they do this a lot. They're like, oh, do men like women who are quiet? Men, do you guys like women that are quiet? Or men like women that are quiet? And I'm going to prove it. Hey, men, do you guys like women that are quiet? And then they all raise their hand. And you're like, see, that proves my claim. I'm not going to say, hey, your claim is wrong because you're biased. I'm going to say, hey, your claim is wrong because your sample size isn't representative of your sample size is the issue. Your sample. This isn't representative of the population, and you're picking a sample that is going to believe you, more likely to believe you than the general population. This isn't how you like jury selection, right? You're going to get 12 different jurors if you're going in, rural Arkansas versus in Portland, Oregon, depending on all that stuff. So that's the problem with what he's doing. Not that he's personally biased. So and that's how you really make a good point. So me to say, well, you're biased and your audience is biased. Yeah, and this is maybe just being me, like the language you use, but I think language matters. I'm not going to say, well, you're wrong because you're biased. You're wrong because the way you're collecting your data is fallacious. That's what's wrong. Does that make sense? Okay. MAGA Republicans will vote for Trump based on his personality's overall vibes. Arguments don't work for someone who doesn't want to think sadly. I think this is true. I think it would be more so that you distrust in the bias would be reason that you were doing the research on your own. Yes. And a lot of times, this is the sad truth. I'm going to be honest about this. Most people aren't going to understand real research, especially on something like science. Like, I'm a lawyer. I have a Juris Doctor. I know how to read. I actually have a bachelor's in psych, and you use a lot of studies there. I took stats, everything. And some studies are like hard, to look at the methodology, to look at, the graphs. I don't understand all those graphs. Here's whatever control group, to understand what a control group is, what a double blind study means. If you guys don't know, these things are things that unless you went to college and you learned this, you wouldn't know that. So people have made this point, and people hate when people make this point because it is, it seems elitist. And I get it. It does seem slightly elitist. I will tell you that. But I do think there's merit to it. Not everyone is qualified to do their own research, right? So when we're talking about something like vaccine efficacy, most of the people that are talking about the vaccine are wholly unable to do their own research on this. They don't know how to read a scientific study. Some do, but I think it's a smaller population than most of the people making claims about it. You don't know how to read that. It's not easy. It's like with, when a Supreme Court case comes out and people don't, I went to school for 3 years to try to understand these Supreme Court cases. You didn't even read the case, right? And so you can make a state like, oh, we should have the right to blah, blah, blah. But to say we should have the constitutional right to blah, 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 or that we should is different. We have the constitutional right to blah, blah, blah. Like, people are like, we have a constitutional right to abortion. You could say we should, and I agree with you. But do we actually already have it? That's going to depend on what the Constitution says and how to interpret it and all of that, which unless you are trained to do, it's going to be more difficult, right? I think with science, it's even harder. So people that are like, global warming doesn't exist. Well, why? Do you know? I don't even know. So sometimes, I'm going to talk about an appeal to authority. Sometimes deferring to the experts makes sense, even though it doesn't make their claim true, right? Just because the experts say this, it doesn't make it true. I agree. That is a fallacy. But sometimes you don't have an option to, you don't personally have it unless you want to sit there and learn and do like hours of studying, learn medicine. You don't really have a choice. So I would also say that sometimes like some of these fallacies, it's like you kind of have to use them in that situation, but it doesn't make it, you have to at the same time say, but I don't know. I say that. I'm going to say, I think global warming is real. Why do you think global warming is real? Because, and again, if I actually studied, looked at this, I would be able to be like, okay, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. They measured this, they did that. And there are people that can do that. But on some topics, it's harder than others. And a lot of the idiots online that are making these claims can't even read. They don't read. I can tell they don't read. They don't know how to spell. They don't know how to do anything. So these people are, in my opinion, unfortunately, wholly unable to verify or not verify claims. They don't know how to do that, which is sad because like what position does that put them in? But at the same time, I'm sorry. It's just reality. That's why the argument of the GOP is that educational institutions are wrong and indoctrinating students because they can't understand what is coming out of the institutions. So they try to discredit them at their core. Yeah, and that's very troubling to me that the right is becoming so anti-science and anti-education, because that is the only science is the only objective way we have to understand the world. And when they're like, no, science doesn't work. So then what are we going off of? People are like, your feelings, people are like common sense. Well, human being common sense is sometimes wrong. Like you may have the common sense that the earth is flat because it looks flat to you, but you're wrong. And what's telling you you're wrong is the data. You may not feel like the climate is changing around you, but the data indicates that it is. Now, you may not fully understand that data, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. I don't fully understand. I haven't gone super in depth with climate change. I'm sure if I did, I could. But in that case, if I was like, oh, someone was like, I was like, climate change is real. And someone's like, why do you think that? Well, because the scientists think that. And they said, well, that's an appeal to authority. I'd agree. So what I would do is then I would actually look at what they're using to indicate that. And if I use the same things they're using, then I would be able to back up the claim. Okay, let me see. Sorry. Okay, we got a lot of stuff here. Also the difference between probabilistic inferences and cut and dry conclusions that you get from deductive logic. And you have to be able to differentiate that. I'm not saying that you can't, like, circumstantial evidence is still evidence. Anecdotal evidence is still evidence, but it's weak evidence. And as long as you acknowledge that it's weak, then sure. The problem is when people don't acknowledge that it's weak, think it's hardcore set in stone evidence, and they actually sometimes ignore better evidence for their anecdotal or weaker evidence. GOP common sense says, if you don't look like me, you don't have rights. Yeah. Your common sense is not as strong as something that has a control group, as a double-blind study, has been replicated, has been peer-reviewed. That has gone through a lot more than like it's common sense that like sex workers are whores. Like, no, it's not. I think experts being connected and supported politically have really strained the idea of deferring to scientific experts. That's a whole different convo, but it's a sign of dangerous shifts. So I'm glad you're attempting to educate in your own small way. Yes. So I don't agree with the way that like scientists maybe handle everything. Like I don't agree with everything they did to handle COVID, but the studies that the scientists are referring to, that is objective. And deferring to the scientists is the fallacy. But if you just look at what the scientists are using to back their claim, then it makes sense. So that's how you get out of that. But a lot of the times, the people that are speaking out against the scientists don't even know how to read those studies. Like they don't know how to read it, especially when it comes to science and medicine and all that. It's not like reading Cat in the Hat. that we all are able to do. It's not like reading and even knowing how a study works, knowing why you need this, knowing why, like how like in a survey, for instance, knowing how, knowing what a loaded question is, which we'll get to, knowing how to get rid of that. Like, you don't know how often they throw out questions, throw out questions, throw out questions, throw out questions. Even in law, you know, you have questions. Oh, we're throwing this, like when you're doing jury selection, like, or anything. Oh, throwing this out. This one is a loaded question. Throwing this out. This one, like court objections, objection, leading, objection, hearsay, like all these objections are because there's issues with what the person is asking. And went to the bottom. Pardon me. A what factory? Yeah, Jordan Peterson retweeted. There was like a porn scene where like people were like, I don't know, there was like men laying down and it was like a semen factory in a hospital, and someone was like, oh, this was happening in China, and Jordan Peterson retweeted it because he thought, and he wrote like, oh, look at what's happening in China, and he deleted it 2 seconds later. It's like, you didn't even think to verify it's something that weird, like that weird with the following you have. You just thought, I'm gonna retweet it, like, looks true. A semen factory looks true. Like, you, such boomer vibes. If a study is biased due to who's funding it, et cetera, you can usually tell by looking at the methodology within the study, or the findings of the study can't be replicated. Most are just too lazy to read the details, though, or do proper research and just throw out the studies without properly challenging them because they don't align with their. I agree with this, but I wouldn't say all the time people are too lazy. I think sometimes people just don't know how. And that's not always their fault. Some people, they're not educated on that. You know that. Some people don't even know what it means to replicate a study. Some people don't know what proper, if you don't know what proper methodology looks like, you're not going to know what improper methodology looks like, right? And nobody, unless you're in the field, like, it's hard to be an expert on it. Like, I'm not. Sometimes I need somebody to point out, but like, that's the thing. Instead of somebody coming on, or a scientist coming on and being like, this is fault, this methodology is an issue because of XYZ, they just go, Pfizer's funding it. And you're like, oh, okay, well, Pfizer's funding it, then fuck it. But the thing is, okay, Pfizer's funding it, but what's actually wrong with the study? And a lot of people don't know how to know what's wrong with the study. And that's the problem we have in America, is people aren't educated enough on this. And again, if you listen, especially, I don't want to sound elitist, and if you listen to my stream last week, then I would argue you would know I'm definitely not elitist because I don't think that people can control this a lot of the time. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. Yes, usually when I read a study, they barely conclude anything. Oh yeah, you're talking about my comment earlier. They're very, science is not like eager to jump to conclusions. That's the thing. As I know it's out of context, I don't know why there are other porn creators aren't just taking your OnlyFans sex tapes with your friend and make it theirs. You ask me this every week, bro. Every week. You have a fetish for this or something? Determining the truth about research is a really boring process. Research takes a long time. Understanding research isn't always possible for lay people. Yeah, it's hard. Even me sometimes. Like, sometimes you just want to watch something and just like, you want the entertainment factor. And you're like, oh, they're going to debate. You don't want to actually like go like do the boring part. You're right. But if you're going to speak on something, you need to do that. So for instance, I guess somebody reached out to me on Twitch, my moderator told me, and was like, oh, I want to debate you. And I was like, I would want to debate anyone. But I'm like, well, on what? And he's like, well, I don't know yet. Like, maybe different topics. I'm like, well, tell me the topics, because if I don't know about it, I don't want to talk about it. And that's good. I know when I get on these red pill podcasts, they're going to like hate me because I'm not going to answer questions. I don't like, they'll be like, so what do you think the average woman's like body count is? I don't know. Why don't we just look up if there's any studies or any way to, why are we just asking random people what they think? Like, what depends. Are you trying to draw a conclusion about what we think? Then sure. But if you're trying to draw a conclusion about what it actually is, what we think has no fucking relationship to that. So I told him, I'm like, yeah, if they want to debate, sex work or morality or there's a lot of things I would love to debate. But I said, if he wants to debate biochemistry, I don't know shit about biochemistry. I'm not going to just sit here and make up shit. I'm not really super knowledgeable on economics or the economy and money and finances. Like, that's not like where my brain is. So if someone wants to come and be like, this is better for the economy, this is better for this tax rate is better for this tax rate is better for that. I'm not educated enough on that. And unlike a lot of other people, if I don't not educated enough, I don't want to just regurgitate talking points by people I agree with or disagree with. I want to independently study it. And honestly, that shit is so fucking boring to me that I won't do it unless I have to for like a paper or something at some point. And because that's not the field I went into, I never really had to learn it and I don't really find it interesting. I think it's very important and I'm glad other people are interested in it. But if I want to make a claim about that, I will do the research first and I will take, you know what I mean? True. One quote I love from George Carlin is something like, think of how dumb the average Joe is now. Imagine that half the population is dumber. Yeah. Well, in regards to rights specifically, people are often talking about moral rights, not legal rights. Well, okay. So give me an example. Because if you give me an example, I can tell you when people can so you're right in the sense that there's an argument you can't talk about morality objectively. This is a very interesting topic and I want to do a stream on it because I am actually torn on objective versus objective morality versus like moral relativism. It has been such a long journey for me and I've left it on the back burner for a while and I'm back after reading The Moral Landscape and seeing Rationality Rules and Cosmic Skeptic debate this issue. So there is scientific objectivity and there's philosophical objectivity and they're different. So it's like a whole thing. And once I can actually get to my position on it, and once I can really hone it in, I want to talk about it with you guys. So some people, like for instance, Sam Harris, we talked about his free will take last week. He argues that you can get objective. So a lot of people, and I used to think this 100%, is you can only get objective morality from religion or an authority. Now I'm not 100% sure because I've heard really great arguments on how you can get objective morality without religion. Okay, anyways. So, but you could argue that it's all relative and you can't tell someone, you could do the whole, you can't get an ought from an is. Some people now say you can't even get a ought from you can't get an ought from an ought, you can only get an ought from an is. Some people say you actually can't even get an ought from an is. Like it goes into deep philosophy, which I'm not trying to get into. But if you're going to take the position that morality is not objective, then yes, your claim about you can't really do that on moral claims is true. But then you can say that you can if I want to say killing babies is wrong, and we're going to go deep into philosophy and they're going to say, well, why? And then I have to defend whether that can be objective truth or not. I'm still not sure on that. But if we're talking about things like, so quickly, and I want to get like Sam Harris believes that it's about well-being. Everything, like if you make morality about well-being, and I'll get more into it because on the surface, you're like, I don't know if you can do that. Then you can make objective claims, even if we don't have the answers. So he uses the example like, how many people were bit by a mosquito in the last 48 hours? We don't know, but there is an answer to it. So there's always an answer actually to what's better for our well. So that's how he gets around it, which I used to be like, no. And then I heard Steven from Rationality Rules talk about it. And I'm like, ooh, maybe. And then I've been like, listen, I've been kind of, anyways, tangent for sure. Hence rights come from God, not from the Constitution. I think the experts being connected and supported politically really, I think I did this. Sorry, I'm going up. Yeah, no one person can possess the knowledge, education, and expertise to decipher every topic that may come up. As a culture, we have to be more than willing to say, I don't know enough about that topic to give a valid opinion. So people say scientists, like, oh, you guys act like you know anything. Science loves to say, I don't know. That's the thing. Like science loves to say, I don't know. And I think one of the mistakes that science made when it came to COVID is that they weren't doing that. But at the same time, I understand because they had to act based on the information that they had. And if they were like uncertain, like they showed the uncertainty to everybody, it was a hard situation. But in general, science is really good at like, I don't know. And as somebody has said before, like the difference between science and religion is scientists want to be, the way you get famous in science is if you prove science wrong. If you change it, that's how you did something in science. Whereas religion, that's not what you can never change. Jasmine, have fun on your other life. Thank you. What example can you say of law degree? What are you saying? Some Kurz Kurgzig, I have no idea how to say that, got some flack on a few weeks ago because someone made a video about how they receive funding from billionaires with interest groups on topic so-and-so. I have no idea how to say that name. Covered and cited in their videos. Yeah, see, economics is boring for me. It is boring for economics is boring for me. I'm sorry. Like as soon as we get past freehand of the market kind of shit, I'm done. I really love like social. Like I love psychology, human behavior, morals, like moral philosophy. That's why I love it. But I don't like especially when it gets into numbers. Like we even in like economic philosophy, kind of. But once we get to thing with economics, like what works and what doesn't work, and then it kind of gets into numbers or like how, okay, here's how to bring down inflation. I have no fucking idea how to bring down inflation. I'm not going to pretend I do. What is the chat about? We're talking about logical fallacies, but we are on a tangent and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to get back in it. Oh, thank you for somebody telling him. In regards to an example, for example, free speech on corporate websites, people acknowledge that corporations have the legal right to do what they want, but not necessarily the moral right. Yeah, you could, I think that's fair. So what's the next fallacy? Yeah, you guys are right. We've been on this one for a while. I'm just going to read one more comment from my moderator. It's kind of a lose-lose when we admit that we don't know it's used as an argument that we are incompetent, but when we say with authority, it's used as an argument that we are lying or talking out of our ass. So when you say something with authority, it's like, this is 100% true. So even like with science, I don't remember where I heard this, but the problem is like in science, people say it's a scientific theory. And then someone goes, oh, it's just a theory. But theory and science means something very different than theory, like when I'm just talking to like my friend, right? So a theory in science, for something to be a science, like evolution is a scientific theory, but it is like we know pretty much that, but they just call everything a theory because everything can be proven false pretty much in science is what they're saying. And so, but if you tell the general public that, then they're like, oh, they don't get it. So you kind of have to say, no, evolution is a fact. But in science world, you can still call it a theory. Yeah, I get what you're saying. All right. Next one. All right, loaded question. The good thing is we can maybe go through these because we're only on, actually we're on 5, but we only have 15 minutes. A loaded question is, this occurs whenever a person asks a question which includes their desired outcome against the person, position of the person answering the question. So it's a question that includes in its implicit assumption about the respondent answering it. The common one is, when did you stop beating your wife? So the ones I use that relate to sex work is, aren't you sad about trading your dignity for money by selling your body online? That's clearly a loaded question because you're implying that that by selling my body online, I traded my dignity for money, right? Or do you believe your own lies? That has the assumption that I'm lying. So an example of this is a little clip I saw from one of these red pill shit. And he goes and he's like, okay, I'm going to ask all the women in the audience, would you rather be single? Would you rather be happily married and a housewife, or single and successful? Who knows? Somebody tell me what the problem with that is. Would you rather be happily married and a housewife, or single and successful? Come on, class, since I'm a teacher, while I read these. A theory is something that is extremely well. Okay, so this is my moderator speaking to before, but somebody answer that. A theory is something that is extremely well established, but there is still a small chance that it could be refuted. Yeah, but that's not what people think. Like, that's what scientific theory is. But like, if I just go to my friend, I'm like, I have a theory that George is like actually gay. That theory is very different than the theory of evolution. All right, let's see. They're both implying a negative outcome for a woman, single and successful. I have zero idea. Assume happy marriage versus not assuming happy career. Exactly. Happy and married versus just single. So no, you have to either say happily married and a housewife and happily single and successful, or you can't put happy in front of anyone. That's called a loaded question. You're implying that, oh, would you rather be happily married and successful? I mean, happily married and a housewife, or single and successful? Why not happily single and successful? How come I'm only happily married, but I'm not? And then they're like, oh, see, women would rather have a husband than be a girl boss. Well, no, you asked a loaded question. And it was so annoying because none of the girls knew. And a lot of them were like, I would rather be happily married. I'm like, oh, bitch, fucking say something. Sorry. You're having a devil of a time typing tonight. I'm a devil of a time talking tonight. Do they train cops to form these loaded questions because they roll off their tongue so easily? Interrogation training is a little bit different. Lawyers try to do this, but then you can object. Leading the witness, right? How many of us have heard that? So if I mean, you wouldn't really ask a witness that, because I don't know how that would be irrelevant. Like, I don't know how that would be ever relevant to ask a witness that, but if it was, you could object for relevance probably, and you could object for leading the witness. Would you rather be happy and fulfilled and married as a married housewife, or would you rather be single and successful? Well, you can't put all these qualifying characteristics on one and not the other. What would you choose between happily married and single? Like, that's the thing. Then I would choose happy, because you're implying I'm happy in one. If I'm happy in one, then I want that one, and I'm not happy and I don't know if I'm happy in the other one. If you said, would you rather be happily married and a housewife or happily single and successful? I'd rather be happily single and successful, to be honest. But I would agree. I would say, like, oh, having meaningful relationships may make you happier, but that doesn't necessarily have to come in marriage, and whatever. Okay, anyways. Next one. All right, false dichotomy. So a false dichotomy occurs when the arguer is presenting only two possible options or outcomes to a position, when in reality there are more options. It's done to narrow the opponent's position to only two possible outcomes. It's an argument tactic designed to lead a narrowed and specific option. Okay, that was repetitive. So actually, COVID is a good one with this, because this was one I saw a long time ago. If the COVID vaccines work, then why are vaccinated people getting COVID? Someone tell me the issue with that. How is this a false dichotomy? If the COVID vaccines work, then why are vaccinated people getting COVID? I love you. Love you too. I actually feel like I'm legit teaching a class. This is fucking hilarious. I'm not qualified to do this. Define it again, please. This occurs when the arguer is presenting only two possible options or outcomes to a position. Let's go with teacher. If the COVID vaccines work, then why are vaccinated people getting COVID? The false dichotomy here is that either the vaccines stop 100% of infections, or the vaccines are completely ineffective. Could the vaccines be effective without being 100% effective? This is implying that they can't. This is implying it has to be 100%. Two options. The vaccine is effective, meaning 100% effective, or the vaccines are ineffective otherwise. So if people are still getting if people still are getting COVID, you see, or let me give you an easier one. The example I had for my own thing. You can choose to be on OnlyFans and give up a husband and a family if you want. You're saying that I can choose to be on OnlyFans. You're saying there's two options in my life: have an OnlyFans and no husband and family, or give up OnlyFans and have a husband and family. Is that true? Are those the only two options? They're implying you can't have love in an OnlyFans. That's false dichotomy. Only two outcomes, either works 100% or 0%. Yeah. It applies the vaccine claim to be 100% effective in playing the disease outright. Yeah. So it's saying that either or. Jasmine, I think you're good on talking here with your beliefs. I'm glad to hear. Okay. Didn't you already leave? I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be rude, but I feel like every time you get in here, you're like, Jasmine, how do you feel about the fact that like your nudes are on the internet? Like, clearly I'm fine with it. I think you have a fetish for it. I'm very good at starting to understand when people have fetishes for something. There was this guy I used to like kind of know, and he constantly would talk about, yeah, I'm cheating on my girlfriend. Like, such a bad guy, I'm cheating. And I'm like, why do you keep bringing this up? And I was like, he thinks it's hot. And then now that I'm on OnlyFans, I'm seeing other people with the fetish. Like, oh, you're so hot. Like, kind of feel guilty because my girlfriend's sleeping next to me. It's like, oh, you think it's a lot of times they don't even have a girlfriend sleeping next to them. They don't even like it's the thought of cheating is a fetish. I think this guy is turned on by that because he asks it every time. I absolutely hate that question. If cleaners have vaccines work, is vaccine not a cure? We're drawn to either. Yeah, it's you're drawn. Basically, drawing to either extremes is a good way to put it, but it's not 100% true all the time. But it's basically saying that there are only two possible outcomes. So next we have, okay, we got like 9 minutes and we got 4 more. So let's do this. Non sequitur, which is that the conclusion of such an argument does not follow from the premises. So this is when, for example, all I see OnlyFans girls do is post their bodies online. Therefore, they have nothing else to contribute to society other than posting their bodies online. That doesn't follow just because you only see, we talked about this with Jordan Peterson, but like in a different way. Just because you only see OnlyFans girls do this, like I only see, it's like saying, I only see Jordan walk his dog on sunny days. Therefore, Jordan only walks his dog when the sun is out. No, you just see it. This is a really easy one because it's basically just saying that the premise, there's something missing to make the conclusion, basically. All right. Appeal to authority / tradition. We kind of talked about appeal to authority before, kind of in depth. So promiscuity is immoral. Why? Because God said promiscuity is moral. Or climate change is real because scientists say it's real. That's a fallacy, and I admit that. But you could say climate change is real because science has determined that they have seen this change in whatever short amount of time. They've seen more whatever in the environment. Like, again, I don't know. And then your claim is, so for instance, here's another example. Porn addiction isn't real because the American Psychological Association and the DSM-5 say it's not real. That's an appeal to authority. It's not an appeal to authority to say a porn addiction is not real because the evidence shows that it doesn't have enough of the addictive properties to consider it a medical addiction with the scientific, like by the scientific standard we have now. No longer a fallacy. So sometimes just like, and that's something that people need to learn how to do is pinpoint your claim. Because if you just pinpoint your claim, you can determine if it's accurate or not, right? If you were to say, like, this is something I always say about, again, red pill people. All women on OnlyFans, all men won't date women on OnlyFans. That's very difficult to prove. Really? All men? Okay, some men. There we go. Now you're right. But people don't like to do that. Anyone who thinks that obviously hasn't seen one of these streams. A lot of them have. Oh, the funniest thing is a lot of people are like, I don't know why you talk about this. Nobody cares. I'm like, really? Because these, like, they don't get thousands of views live, but I'm like, and no one's seeing my boobs on these. I'm like, nobody, you don't care. Fine. But, I only see police officers accused of domestic abuse. Therefore, only police to commit domestic abuse. Yes. Or I only see police officers accused of domestic abuse. Therefore, all police officers are domestic abusers. Like, all of those are non sequiturs. Having that pinpoint takes takes years and a lot of effort. I agree. Okay. And then appeal to tradition. Sex work is immoral because it's let's see. Women should stay at home because for most of human history, they've stayed at home. This is just such a stupid argument. It's insinuating that just because something has been done a certain way, it is the correct way to do it. Or just because something is, basically. So like, and again, the reason this is not a good argument is because then you don't change anything. Like you could say, before we freed the slaves, slavery has been around forever. So it's right. It's the right way to run a society. Well, why is it the right way to run society? Because it's always been the way we ran society. That is a fallacy for a good reason. Another one that's really common, appeal to popular opinion. So this is fallacy occurs when someone is making an argument that a position is true because a great number or the majority of people hold that position. So people think sex workers are whores, therefore sex workers are whores. This is kind of related to the ad hominem we were talking about. It doesn't matter how many people believe the claim. The claim is either true or not true. There was a time where popular belief was that the earth was flat. That's what everyone believed. The earth was not flat at that time just because everyone believed it. So appeal to popular opinion, or some people say appeal to common belief, is a fallacy. Okay, good. Hasty generalization is making a claim based on a sample size that is too small or to support the claim. So example from like what I just said, we just asked these girls if they like short men and they said no, therefore men don't like short men. That's called a hasty generalization. You're taking something way too small and then you're generalizing it. Both of the doctors I know wake up really early, therefore all doctors wake up really early, or therefore doctors wake up early, because the 2 doctors I know wake up early. That one's pretty easy to understand. I wish we had more of these streams. Normal day life does not afford me a lot of chance to use my critical thinking. Thank you. That makes me so happy. Every Monday. Some traditional women may have stayed at home, but at the same time, sex work is technically the oldest profession, so you can't even use appeal to tradition against it. I guess you could say that it's sex workers have been demonized and criticized for all of human history because sexual purity has been valued for all of human history, so it should be valued today. First of all, that's not even true, because if you go, it's actually only recent human history that's kind of been a thing. Like, yeah, we were going, if you look back far enough, the evidence indicates we were just like hunter-gatherer times. Like, there was no proper ladies back in those times, you know. So one, faulty premise, I would argue. But 2, just because something worked before, or that's how things were, does not mean that's how things should be. Appeal to tradition. Like those YouTube channels that do street interviews on complex topics, social topics with focus on relationships. Yeah. Again, you have to again, like if you want to say, hey, I interviewed some people and they said this, so maybe like some people think this, that's different than saying, ooh, we've done study after study after study that's gone through all of this rigorous scientific, gone through this scientific rigor, and this is what we found. That is much stronger evidence than that. But people don't think that. People are like, oh, I saw this, therefore this. So that's why these things are important to point out. Tonight's stream is on point. Going to definitely replay this when I kept my mind active while I was trying to beat a crazy hard boss and secure. I don't know what that means. Is that a game? I don't play games. I want to try, but I don't play them at this time. All right, guys. Well, I'm glad you found that interesting. I tried my best. Probably didn't explain everything perfectly. This stuff is easy, but then once you have to like apply it or catch it, it can get hard. So I think it's a good thing too. The LSAT has a lot of this. Like, it'll have an argument and they'll be like, what is like the problem with this argument? And then you could say, like, they have a bunch of different options, and it's hard. That's what else is hard. It's like, it makes a broad generalization. It does this, and you like look back, you're like, does it? What? You know. When is the AI discussion, by the way? Once I have enough time to learn it. This is much easier because I know this stuff. AI is going to be a while out. Excellent stream as always. Good luck, Samurai. Okay, you guys clearly know something I don't about what he's playing. All right. If you guys want to join my OF live, I'm gonna go right now. I just need to change into something a little sexier, and I will see you there. Any idea for next week's topic? If I can get through my CLEs, I'll do an evidence one, so you guys know what's like admissible evidence, what's not admissible evidence. We'll go a little lawyer on you, and then we'll see. All right, thank you guys. Do you ever talk about the wars? Like the culture wars? What do you mean? I feel like that's kind of embedded in a lot of stuff I talk about. But anyways, thank you so much, and I will see you next week, or I'll see you right now.